Hi, I'm Lorraine. I was kicked out of my home after my own brother framed me, and for 10 years my parents pretended I didn't exist, until they needed something from me. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be erased by the people who should have loved you the most? Before we dive into my story, tell me, what time are you listening to this and where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, I'd love to hear. The smell of vanilla filled the kitchen, clinging to the cracked tiles and the faded curtains as I stirred the batter one last time. I scraped it into the pan, smoothing the top carefully with the back of a spoon, and slid it into the oven. It wasn't much, a simple box mix cake, but to me it meant everything. It was my 14th birthday. I told myself that maybe this year things would be different. Maybe this time someone would notice. The house felt unusually quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that hummed with tension, cold despite the sticky summer air pressing against the windows. I wiped my hands on my jeans and glanced toward the living room where Gerald, my father, sat watching the game, barely glancing up when I walked past. Darlene, my mother, was on the phone, laughing, her voice bright and hollow. Chadwick, of course, was nowhere to be seen. He had been buzzing with excitement all morning about the party planned for him that evening. I checked the time. 5 more minutes on the cake. I wanted it to be perfect. Later, I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, my cake cooled and frosted with trembling hands. I listened to the burst of laughter outside, the sounds of Chadwick's friends arriving, balloons bobbing on the fence, the barbecue sizzling in the backyard. No one had said a word to me. No one had even glanced at the small cake sitting on the counter, its lonely candle waiting. I waited for someone to call me outside. Maybe they had a surprise planned. Maybe... Can you bring out more plates? Darlene's voice cut through the hope blooming in my chest. Quickly, Lorraine, and make yourself useful, okay? I carried the plates out to the patio where Chadwick was surrounded by his friends opening gifts, high-fiving. Someone handed me a slice of his cake, 3 layers professionally decorated, and I smiled weakly, setting it aside. Later, after everyone had eaten and the sun had dipped low behind the trees, I returned to the kitchen. I pulled the matches from the drawer and struck one, lighting the candle perched on my homemade cake. Happy birthday, I whispered to myself, watching the flame flicker. No one noticed. No one heard. When it came time for family photos, I hovered near the group, cake forgotten on the counter. Step aside, Lorraine, Darlene said sweetly but firmly, adjusting Chadwick's tie. Let's just get a few of Chadwick and the family first, okay? I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, and backed away, fading into the kitchen shadows. Later, when I found the printed album lying on the coffee table, I flipped through it slowly. Page after page of smiling faces, arms thrown around each other. Chadwick and Gerald, Chadwick and Darlene, Chadwick and friends. No sign of me, not one. It wasn't a mistake. I understood that now. I had been edited out, erased like a smudge on a photograph no one cared to keep. In my room that night, the small cake sat untouched on the dresser, the candle now a sad little stub. I sat cross-legged on the bed, the darkness wrapping around me like a second skin. I made a silent vow, right then and there. I would remember this feeling. I would never forget how invisible they made me. Outside, the summer insects buzzed, a low, constant hum against the thick night air. Inside, my own heart was the only thing I could hear, beating steady, heavy, and hollow. The acceptance letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon, folded crisply in a white envelope that practically glowed against the chipped paint of our mailbox. My hands trembled as I pulled it free, the air thick with the sticky scent of freshly cut grass. For a moment, just one, it felt like the universe had finally tilted in my favor. I tore it open on the porch steps, heart thundering. Journalism. A real future, one I had dared to imagine beyond the crumbling walls of our house and the heavy, unspoken hierarchies within it. I pictured Gerald clapping me on the back, Darlene pulling me into one of her rare hugs. I pictured pride. I pictured belonging. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, filling out forms, circling tuition costs, and calculating the savings I had stashed away from babysitting, mowing lawns, selling handmade jewelry at flea markets. I was close, so close. I just needed a little help, just a little bridge to get me there. The next day, as I carried a basket of laundry past the open living room door, I heard Gerald's voice, low and dismissive. "It's too expensive to waste on her," he said. Darlene murmured something I couldn't make out, the clink of her coffee spoon punctuating the air. Family finances are tight, Gerald added with finality. I froze, gripping the laundry basket tighter, the plastic edge digging into my fingers. Tight. Tight enough that Chadwick received a brand new laptop the very same afternoon, delivered with laughter and backslaps and Darlene's beaming smile. That evening, I sat in my room, the scholarship acceptance letter spread out on my bed like a relic. I stared at the words until they blurred together, hope dissolving into something sour and heavy. A knock at the door. Darlene stepped inside without waiting for permission, carrying a thin brochure. Community college offers bookkeeping classes, she said, her tone falsely bright. A safe choice for someone like you, reliable. She patted my shoulder, missing the way I flinched. Not everyone needs to chase dreams, Lorraine. Some of us just need to be practical. Practical. As if my ambitions were an indulgence, a childish whim. I nodded because it was easier, because arguing never changed anything. Later that night, I sat back at the kitchen table, alone under the yellowed light. I unfolded the scholarship letter one last time, smoothing the creases carefully. Then I folded it again, smaller and smaller, until it fit into the back of my journal, hidden between pages no one else would ever read. The unopened laptop box for Chadwick sat glittering in the hallway like a trophy. Outside, the midsummer air pressed against the windows, thick and hot and heavy, but inside I shivered, understanding that the walls around me would never shelter dreams like mine. When I got home from school that afternoon, the air inside the house felt heavier than the storm clouds gathering outside. I kicked off my sneakers at the door, already sensing that something was wrong. The smell of dust and bleach hit me first, sharp and unnatural. Then I saw the trash bags, 3 of them, sitting like abandoned pets in the middle of the hallway, my clothes, my books, my life, stuffed away in plastic. Gerald stood by the staircase, arms crossed, his mouth set in a grim line. "Chadwick needs your room," he said without looking at me. "You'll move into the storage room. Tonight." I opened my mouth to protest, but no sound came out. His gaze pinned me in place, daring me to argue. Behind him, Darlene hovered in the kitchen, pretending to scrub the counter, not once turning around. Chadwick was nowhere to be seen, but I could feel his presence like a smug shadow around every corner. I bent down, my hands shaking, and picked up the nearest bag. It was heavier than it looked, or maybe I was just tired. I dragged it down the hallway, every step toward the storage room feeling like a walk to my own execution. The door creaked when I pushed it open. The smell of mildew rushed out to greet me. No windows, no shelves, just cracked walls, a sagging mattress dumped on the floor, and a single bare bulb swaying from the ceiling. I dropped the bag with a dull thud and sank down onto the mattress. It dipped low to one side, springs protesting beneath me. I ran my hand over the frayed fabric, trying to swallow the lump rising in my throat. This wasn't a room. It was a sentence. I didn't have long to process the shift. Chadwick appeared in the doorway, his grin wide and gleaming. "Enjoy your palace," he said, tossing a handful of ripped clothes into the room. They landed in a sad heap near the mattress. Darlene's voice floated down the hall. "Boys will be boys," she called, laughter laced with something colder. I stared at the pile of clothes, at the peeling walls, at the ceiling that already had a dark, spreading stain. No one was coming to my defense. No one even cared enough to pretend anymore. That night, the first storm of the season broke over Charleston. Thunder cracked the sky open, rain drumming against the roof like desperate fists. Water leaked through the crack in the ceiling, dripping steadily onto the floor, forming a dark pool beside my mattress. I lay on my back, the damp creeping up into my bones, clutching my journal against my chest like a life raft. In the flickering light of the bulb, I made myself a promise, one I etched deep into my heart. I wouldn't stay small, I wouldn't stay here. Someday, somehow, I would find a way to grow beyond these crumbling walls. I tried to settle into the storage room like it was normal, like it wasn't a punishment carved into my daily life. Homework on the mattress, sketches taped to the cracked walls. Routine became my shield, my way of pretending that the air wasn't growing thinner around me every day. Some evenings I could hear Gerald and Darlene in the living room, their voices low but clear enough. They spoke about me like I wasn't their daughter anymore, just a burden gathering dust at the edge of their world. "She's becoming a real disappointment," Gerald muttered once. "She always was," Darlene said, so easily, like it was a fact and not a knife between my ribs. I held onto the scraps of myself like precious things, but it didn't matter. The cracks were already too deep. It started with the vase, a heavy crystal piece that sat proudly on the living room mantel, a symbol of something we were supposed to be. It shattered while I was at school. When I walked through the door that afternoon, Gerald was waiting, arms crossed. Chadwick stood off to the side, hands shoved into his pockets, head bowed with faux remorse. "She must have done it," Chadwick said softly. "Maybe she was upset." I blinked, confusion turning to panic. "I wasn't even here," I said, voice shaking. "Enough," Gerald snapped. "You've been looking for ways to lash out for months." My protests didn't matter. Logic didn't matter. That night, my phone was confiscated. I wasn't allowed to leave the house except for school. I wasn't allowed to speak unless spoken to. The walls of my prison grew smaller still. It didn't stop there. A few days later, Darlene couldn't find her car keys. Gerald's favorite coffee mug turned up broken. The milk carton was found leaking all over the fridge. Each time Chadwick shrugged, pointed his finger. Each time Gerald believed him without question. Each time I lost another piece of ground beneath my feet. Eventually, I stopped defending myself. It was like shouting into a void that only echoed back blame. It was easier, less exhausting, to absorb it all silently. At a family dinner with relatives I barely knew, Darlene sighed dramatically after a tense silence. "Somehow," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Lorraine finds a way to ruin everything." Laughter. Forced, nervous, but it filled the room like smoke. I looked around, searching for anyone to catch my eye, to silently say, "I know this isn't fair." But no one met my gaze, not even Chadwick, who hid a smirk behind his glass of sweet tea. I realized in that moment that I wasn't just disappointing them. I was something to be ashamed of, a blemish they could not scrub clean but would gladly ignore. After everyone left, I stayed behind to clean the kitchen. The dishes piled high, the smell of leftover gravy thick in the air. I scrubbed until my hands stung, until the water turned lukewarm and the night stretched long and heavy. I stood there long after the plates were stacked, staring out the window into the dark backyard, and felt something inside me go quiet. Not broken, not yet, just quiet. Thanksgiving arrived wrapped in forced smiles and the smell of roasting turkey. I didn't want to go, but when Gerald barked that I was expected to show up and act normal, there wasn't really a choice. Expectations weighed heavier than the gray clouds hanging low over Charleston that day. The house was filled with relatives I hadn't seen in years, some barely more than strangers. Darlene pressed a pitcher of lemonade into my hands the moment I walked through the door. "Make yourself useful," she whispered before floating off to greet one of Chadwick's college friends, treating him like royalty. The atmosphere buzzed with cheerful chatter, but underneath it all I could feel it, the dread curling low in my stomach, the certainty that tonight would not pass quietly. I kept my head down, pouring drinks, clearing plates, doing whatever I could to stay invisible. Dinner started off predictably enough. Plates passed around, glasses clinking. I sat at the end of the table unnoticed. Gerald, who had refilled his glass one too many times, suddenly banged his fork against his plate to get everyone's attention. "You know," he slurred, chuckling. "Our little Lorraine here used to be a real troublemaker. Got herself suspended back in school for picking fights." Laughter erupted around the table. Darlene giggled nervously, covering her mouth with a napkin. I froze, the mashed potatoes on my plate turning cold and lumpy. It wasn't true. It had never been true. Chadwick's lies had grown so large that now they were part of the family folklore, a joke everyone could share at my expense. I felt every set of eyes slide toward me, curious, amused, dismissive. Even the cousins I hadn't seen since grade school laughed along, clinking their glasses as if Gerald had just told the punchline of the year. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell them all the truth, but my voice was locked behind my teeth. Instead, I swallowed it down like spoiled wine, burning all the way to my stomach. When dessert was served, seating was rearranged. Chadwick and the favored cousins crowded around the main dining table, their laughter filling the room. Someone patted a spot at the far end of the folding kids' table for me, next to the toddlers sticky with pie filling. No one looked twice. No one cared. I picked at a slice of pumpkin pie, the fork heavy in my hand. Across the room, Chadwick caught my eye and lifted his glass in a silent, mocking toast. The room spun in slow motion, the laughter becoming a dull roar in my ears. This wasn't just about today. This was about every moment they had looked past me, every time they chose to believe the worst, every time they built Chadwick's throne from my broken pieces. After dinner, I slipped out without saying goodbye. My absence was as unnoticed as my presence had been. In the car, I sat gripping the steering wheel, breath shallow, the dashboard lights blurring through a wash of tears. But somewhere under the shame, something else stirred. A stubborn, small ember that refused to die. This won't be the end of me. I tried to blend in at school, keeping my head down, focusing on my assignments like they were lifelines. Every morning, I convinced myself things would get better if I just stayed quiet, if I just behaved perfectly. But the whispers followed me down the hallways, soft and cutting like paper slices against my skin. At first, I thought it was the usual teenage drama. A bad day, a misunderstanding, something that would blow over by Friday. But the looks lingered, and the distance between me and everyone else grew wider with every passing hour. It wasn't long before the rumor detonated. I was sitting in algebra when the intercom crackled to life, summoning me to the principal's office. My heart pounded against my ribs as I gathered my books, every eye in the classroom glued to my back as I walked out. Principal Harris sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, his mouth drawn into a line so thin it almost disappeared. "Lorraine," he said without looking up, "we need to talk about some very serious accusations." The door clicked shut behind me. My throat went dry. Chadwick had told them I assaulted him, that I lashed out in fits of rage at home. There were even so-called witnesses, fabricated no doubt, stitched together by Chadwick's careful hands. By the time Gerald and Darlene arrived, the damage was done. They didn't even ask for my side. They sat there, stone-faced, nodding solemnly as Chadwick recounted his lies with trembling lips and tear-bright eyes. Brave little soldier. The suspension was immediate. No hearing, no evidence, just the sharp snap of judgment slamming down like a gavel. I tried to speak, to explain, but Principal Harris held up his hand. "Given the circumstances, Lorraine, it's best if you take some time away." The walk home felt endless, every step heavier than the last. Within days, the real execution began, not by the school but by my classmates. A private group chat surfaced, filled with cruel jokes, doctored photos of me looking wild-eyed and unhinged. I wasn't just suspended, I was exiled, mocked, picked apart piece by piece. Someone made a meme of me with devil horns. Another labeled me the family psycho. Even teachers, once mildly indifferent, now glanced at me with a cocktail of pity and distrust. I deleted my social media accounts in one sweeping, desperate motion, erasing every trace of myself I could find. It didn't stop the whispers. It didn't stop the stares. At home, I was grounded indefinitely. No phone, no friends, no escape. I sat in the corner of my storage room, feeling the weight of silence press down harder than any punishment ever could. One night, I found an old shoebox filled with photos from better days. Birthday parties where I still smiled naturally, summer afternoons at the beach before everything soured. One by one, I fed them into the small metal wastebasket in the corner, watching the edges curl and blacken. If they were going to rewrite my story, I wouldn't cling to a version of the past that never truly belonged to me. The house was quieter than usual, the kind of stillness that didn't soothe but unsettled. I moved through it like a ghost, careful not to draw attention. Gerald sat in his recliner, flipping channels with mechanical disinterest. Darlene busied herself in the kitchen, scrubbing an already spotless counter. Chadwick lounged on the couch, tapping away at his phone, wearing the lazy smirk he had perfected over the years. No one looked at me, no one spoke to me, but the air was thick with something unspoken, something sharp and waiting. I kept my head down, hoping that if I made myself small enough, quiet enough, they might forget the storm brewing just beneath their indifference. It was a foolish hope. That evening, as I folded laundry in the dim light of my storage room, the door burst open with a violence that rattled the cracked walls. Gerald stood there, his face carved from stone, and threw a duffel bag onto the mattress. "Pack your things," he said. "You're leaving." I stared at him, the words not sinking in at first. What do you mean?" I asked. my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't live here anymore," he said, already turning away. "You're done embarrassing this family." Darlene appeared behind him, carrying more bags, my clothes, my books, even the worn journal I kept hidden under my pillow. She didn't meet my eyes. She just set them down by the door like discarded donations. "No, please." I stumbled after them, my heart clawing its way into my throat. "I can fix it. I didn't. Please, just listen." Gerald didn't break stride. Darlene didn't even pause. Chadwick stood at the top of the stairs, watching the scene unfold with detached amusement, like a king surveying a peasant's exile. When the door finally slammed shut behind me, it echoed through the cold night like a final verdict. I stood on the front porch, clutching a garbage bag filled with my life. I tried calling them. No answer. I tried texting. Messages undelivered. Emails bounced back. By the next morning, I realized they had blocked me on everything. In one night, I went from family to ghost. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a slammed door and a number disconnected. I lingered on the porch until the sun dipped low and the streetlights buzzed to life. I waited for the porch light to flick on, to signal that maybe someone inside had changed their mind, that maybe a sliver of humanity had survived. Instead, the porch light flicked off, plunging me into darkness. I adjusted the strap of my duffel bag, feeling the sharp bite of the plastic against my palm. I looked back once at the house, at the windows that glowed warmly against the night, and then turned away. My feet hit the sidewalk with a soft, steady rhythm. One step, then another, and another. I carried nothing but myself into the night. The years unfolded slowly, like a letter you're afraid to finish reading. I built my life piece by piece, each word I wrote stacking another brick in a house that no one could tear down this time. By my early 30s, I had built something real. Clients who trusted me, readers who saw me. A small but cozy apartment in Charleston filled with light and silence. The good kind. The kind I chose. Opal remained my tether to love, the only person who remembered my birthdays without needing a Facebook reminder, who celebrated my promotions like they were graduations. She was a lighthouse, steady even when the waves got rough. For a long time, it felt like the past had finally stayed buried. Until the phone call. It came on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of bright, breezy day that almost made you believe winter couldn't touch you anymore. Darlene's name flashed on my screen, an artifact I had never deleted, though I rarely thought about it anymore. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hi, honey," she said, her voice syrupy and strained. "It's been so long." I stayed silent, letting the words curdle between us. "We were hoping," she continued, her voice hitching for effect, "you could help us. The roof's leaking, the furnace went out, your father's health isn't what it used to be." "Family duty," she said, like it was a chain I had slipped free from but was expected to wear again without question. I listened, let her pile guilt on top of guilt, words stacked like kindling. When she finally paused for breath, I said, "I hope you find the help you need," and ended the call. I sat there for a long moment afterward, phone still in hand, feeling the old wounds pulse, not freshly bleeding, but tender, like scars stretched too tight. It didn't take long for the backlash to begin. Cousins I barely remembered flooded my inbox with vague, passive-aggressive messages about honoring family and not forgetting who raised me. A few left voicemails dripping with disappointment, like I had turned my back on a great legacy instead of surviving it. The narrative was already taking shape. Lorraine, the ungrateful daughter. Lorraine, the selfish one. They didn't want me back. They wanted a checkbook with a pulse. I closed my laptop, the familiar burn of anger and sadness mixing into something sharper, something cleaner. That night, I sat at my kitchen table under the soft yellow glow of the pendant light, drafting a letter. Not a rant, not a cry for pity, a statement. I wrote it carefully, deliberately, each word weighted and true. I detailed the years of neglect, the lies, the exile. I wrote about the birthdays forgotten, the rooms stripped away, the laughter that had hollowed me out. I attached screenshots, old photos, proof, not to convince anyone, but to remind myself that my memory wasn't the unreliable narrator they had tried to make me believe it was. When the letter was done, I sat there staring at the send button. My hand hovered over the mouse, my heart strangely calm. This time they would not rewrite my story. This time I would decide what was remembered. I pressed send and leaned back in my chair, watching the screen flicker once before going still. It was done. The truth was out now, sewn into the fabric of every inbox belonging to every cousin, aunt, and uncle who had ever laughed at the wrong moments, stayed silent when it mattered, or chosen to forget. At first, there was silence, the kind that hummed under the skin and made you wonder if it had really worked. Then, slowly, the responses trickled in. A few apologies came, tentative and awkward, as if testing the waters of a river they weren't sure how to cross. Others responded with coldness, thinly veiled blame tucked between brittle sentences. Some didn't reply at all. Their silence said more than their words ever could. I absorbed it all with a strange, steady calm. I wasn't the same girl who once stood frozen in a crowded dining room waiting for someone, anyone, to look at her with kindness. I read the messages without trembling hands. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. Gerald and Darlene never responded. Not directly. But I heard through the whispering grapevine, neighbors who still spoke too loudly in grocery store aisles, old classmates who posted cryptic comments online that my parents were furious, humiliated, cut off from the community they had once clung to like a lifeboat. I thought I would feel victorious. I thought I would celebrate, but all I felt was a slow, heavy ache that settled somewhere deep in my chest. Winning, it turned out, didn't mean the pain went away. It just meant the pain stopped dictating the story. I realized something I hadn't understood before. Closure wasn't about dragging apologies out of people who couldn't give them. Closure was something you built for yourself when you were finally ready to stop bleeding for others. And I was ready. Days slipped into weeks. I poured myself back into my work, my friendships, my quiet evenings with Opal, where the air smelled of jasmine and the nights were filled with easy conversation and the click of knitting needles. Sometimes I visited old places, a bookstore where I had once hidden between the shelves during high school lunches, the public library where I spent hours sketching dreams no one else cared to hear. I claimed them now, not as relics of hurt, but as reminders of resilience. Family, I realized, could be something you chose. It could be soft and strong and stitched together from trust, not just blood. One evening, just as the last threads of spring unraveled into the early breath of summer, I found myself walking past my childhood home. The paint was peeling. The lawn was overgrown. The windows were dark. I didn't stop. I let the memories rise and fall around me like passing cars on a distant highway. There, but no longer holding me hostage, I smiled to myself. A real smile this time, and turned toward the city, where lights blinked like tiny promises against the dusk. My story wasn't written in that house anymore. It was unfolding ahead of me, page by page, on streets I chose, under skies that finally felt wide enough to hold me. Life has a way of teaching us that healing doesn't always come with an apology. Sometimes it's about standing on your own 2 feet after the storm, choosing peace even when anger feels easier. I've learned that your worth isn't defined by the people who failed to see it. It's shaped by how you choose to move forward, how you decide to live freely without needing their validation. Maybe you've been there too, cut out, forgotten, or misunderstood. Maybe you're still finding your way through the wreckage. Wherever you are, know this. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to build a life rooted in love, not obligation. What about you? Have you ever had to walk away to save yourself? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. If this video touched your heart, leave a 1 inch in the comments or share your thoughts. And if you didn't connect with it, tell me why. I'm always here to listen. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more journeys of resilience and hope, please hit subscribe and join our growing community. Your voice matters here.